Hey guys, so this is our next question from Leetcode SQL 50. Question number 1661, average time of process per machine. So we have a table here called activity with 4 columns and their data types. And there's some information about the columns. So here's the question. There's a factory website that has several machines, each running the same number of processes. Write a solution to find the average time each machine takes to complete a process. So the time to complete a process is the end timestamp minus the start timestamp. And then we have to calculate the average time. The resulting table should have the machine ID along with the average time as processing ID, which should be rounded to 3 decimal places. So we have to round the average time in the final script to 3 decimal places and then return the results table in any order. So here is an example input and an example output. So we have these 4 columns: machine ID, process ID, activity type, and timestamp. So we have 3 machines here, machine number 0, 1, and 2, and each of them will have 2 different timestamps. So start time and end time, and it'll be tied to a process ID. So this process ID is an individual one. So it's process ID 0, and each process ID will have start and end. So this is for machine ID 0. This is the same process ID 0, and then this is the start and end timestamp. Similarly, for machine ID 0 again, we have process ID 1, which will have its own start and end timestamp. So what we have to do is we have to find the average timestamp. So for this one, it would be 1.52 minus 0.712, which is around 0.7. So we are just doing end minus start, and then we'll do plus the difference of these two. So 4.12 minus 3.14, which is about 1. So 1 plus 0.7 divided by 2. So we'll get the average time for that, which is 0.894. And we'll do the same for others. So each machine ID will have several processes, and each process will have an activity type. So it has to have a start timestamp and an end timestamp. And then we have to return the machine ID. So we'll group it using machine ID, and then we'll use average aggregate function to calculate the average processing time. All right, so what I've done here is I've already created the table activity, and I've inserted those values in here, our sample values for this example, the test case scenario. And I'm gonna leave the sample input and output on the right so you can see it. So for this example, what we need to do is for each process and each machine ID, we have to find the end time for each process and the start time and take the difference out. So what we can do is, in this case, we can use a self join. So we can join this table with itself, and one of the tables will have the start timestamp for each process, and the other table will have the end timestamp. So we can take the difference easily. So this is a good example where we can use a self join. So I'm selecting from this table. Let me just leave it as is so we can see this while we write our query. And then what I'm going to do is select all from my activity table. I'm going to call it S. So I'm going to call it S because it's I'm going to have all the start times in there. And then I'm going to inner join my activity table again. And then this time I'm going to call it E because I'm going to keep all the end timestamps here. And then I'm going to join them on the machine ID and the process ID. On s.machine ID equals e.machine ID because I want to separate them out and I want to see them, the start and end timestamp for each machine ID for each process. And s dot, I'm going to do the same thing for process ID equals e.machine ID because I can't simply take the end and start timestamp, the difference between these two, for the entire machine ID because these are individual processes. So I have to separate them out by the process ID. Okay, now I've done this here. And then what I'm gonna say is I am gonna have only the start timestamp in my activity table. So I can say and s.activity ID equals start and e.activity type equals end because I want to have all the start timestamps in my S table and my end timestamps in my E table. Okay, so looks like I've got everything here, and then I'm just gonna show you what it looks like now. So I'm gonna select my machine ID. So let's just select it from my as table, machine ID as the process ID, and then remember as table only has a start timestamp as dot timestamp. So this will be the start timestamp, and then e dot timestamp will be the end timestamp. Okay, so let's execute it now. Let's see what we have here. All right, so in my input table I had how many? I had 12 rows, and here I have 4 rows in here. Okay, this is process ID. This is not machine ID, my bad. So I'm just gonna correct it, run it again, because I'm joining it on machine ID and the process ID. Okay, so I have 6 rows here. So half the number of rows, because we have the start and end timestamps in the same row. So here we can see for process machine 0, for process ID 0, we have, this is the start timestamp 0.712, and this is the end timestamp. Let me just scroll up here, and then similarly here we have 3.14 is the start and 4.12 is the end timestamp, because we have S only has start timestamp and E only has end timestamps. And then to find the time taken, I can just do end timestamp. So I'm going to do E dot timestamp, because that's the larger timestamp, minus S dot timestamp. Okay, so this is going to give me the time taken, 0.8, 0.9, and we are going to take the average. Okay, so everything is looking good here. Now what I'm going to do is, all I need for this is I need my machine ID. So I'm going to leave machine ID here, and then I need this here. I'm going to take all of this out because the question does not need it from here. So this is the time taken, and I'm going to call it processing time. Processing time. Let me execute this. So this is for each machine ID broken down by each process. So now I'm gonna just group it by machine ID. So I'm just gonna say, let me just copy it from here, group by machine ID, and here I need the average time. So I'm just gonna use the aggregate function average. Gonna put this whole thing in average. So this is the average processing time. Let me execute it now. Okay, so for the first one, the average time taken is 0.894 seconds. The second one is 0.995 seconds, and for the third machine it is 1.456. This is what we are expecting. And finally we have to round it up to 3 decimal places. So I'm just gonna use the round function, and I'm just gonna say round it to 3 decimal places. Okay, so we have our results here, and this is the output we are expecting. So this is the solution for this question. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and thank you for watching.